Hello, everybody, and welcome to Penguins to Go, your daily dose of Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. You can find us on YouTube at Inside the Penguins or anywhere you get your podcasts from. I'm your host, Nick Brlansky, and I know we've been talking a lot about free agency and the NHL draft and Kyle Dubas and signings and what's he going to do for next season, but there is one player on the Pittsburgh Penguins that is under contract for next season that I feel is not only underutilized, but really underappreciated by both the Penguins and the fan base as a whole. And that's Chad Ruhwedel. Ruhwedel is entering the final year of his current contract with the Penguins, and this is the end of his fourth deal with the team. And the highest cap hit that he's ever had, with $800,000. Think about that. He's signed 4 different contracts, and the highest cap hit he has had is $800,000, excuse me. And it's not for a lack of success, because for all intents and purposes, Chad Ruhwedel has played his role to a T since he first joined the Pittsburgh Penguins back in 2016. It's also his 8th season as a member of the Pittsburgh Penguins. It's hard to believe that he's been around that long. A lot of people forget he was on the Stanley Cup team in 2017. He worked for the first 5 seasons with the team as a proverbial seat filler. That's why a lot of people don't know much about him. Or people know of him, but he's not the first name you think of when you think of defenseman for the Pittsburgh Penguins, because he was a seat filler. Oh, somebody's injured. Now Chad Ruhwedel gets to play. Oh, down goes somebody else in the bottom or in the defense core. Okay, now we'll utilize Chad Ruhwedel. And every time he came in, whether it was, with 2 days of rest or when he hadn't played in 3 weeks, he was always steady as she goes. Always solid as a defensive player. And yet, it seems like the Pittsburgh Penguins just continue to disrespect the man. I mean, not in a realistic sense, because they've had him under contract for 8 seasons, so clearly they've liked something about him. Mike Sullivan has liked having Chad Ruhwedel there and likes having that option. I'd say it's break glass in case of emergency, but then there'd be shattered glass all over the floor because they've used him so many different times. But after 5 seasons as a seat filler for the Pittsburgh Penguins blue line, he finally got the chance to be an everyday player in 2021-22. And some players, when they get that opportunity, just aren't up for it. And then they go back to being a seat filler. And that's perfectly fine. Listen, play to the best of your abilities. That's all anybody asks for. But Chad Ruhwedel didn't have that happen. He stepped in 2021-22, and he became an everyday NHLer. 78 games played, averaged over 15 minutes of ice time. He had 53.5% of the shot attempts at 5-on-5, 56% of the expected goals, 55% of the scoring chances, and 57% of the high danger chances for at 5-on-5 when he was on the ice. Those are, for those who don't follow analytics, which is fine. I don't expect everybody that listens to this podcast to follow analytics. Those are very good analytics for a defenseman. And he was able to do that in 15 minutes of ice time. He just ate up time on ice. He doesn't take stupid penalties. He doesn't take penalties really at all. He kills penalties, and he just goes out there and does his job. He's good at his job. The team defense that season was very good. 10th in the NHL in goals against, 9th in the NHL in expected goals against. So you would expect, even though Ron Hextall said, we want to change some things up on defense, nothing wrong with what Chad Ruhwedel was doing. $800,000, third pairing, right side. That one's figured out. And yet, Ruhwedel's reward was the signing of Jan Rutta. Gone is Chad Ruhwedel's everyday spot. Not to mention the fact that the Penguins also traded for Ty Smith, which is the shiny new toy that nobody else is going to pay attention to Chad Ruhwedel because they want Ty Smith in that role and not Ruhwedel. The Penguins had an overstaffed and overpaid defense corps last season. And Chad Ruhwedel got lost in the shuffle. He got relegated back to fill-in duties once again. And yet, he didn't complain. He didn't request a trade. He still came out, worked day in and day out, was at all the practices. He put up good numbers when he got in because guess what? It's the NHL. It's the Pittsburgh Penguins. There's going to be injuries. So he went out, played 47 games last season. So he got to his peak at 78 games played the year before. The Penguins go out. They add Jan Rutta. They add Jeff Petrie. They have 10 NHL-ready defensemen. And Chad Ruhwedel drops from 78 games played down to 47. And again, he put up good numbers. He played 43 of those 47 games alongside P.O. Joseph, who was having some struggles and some growing pains in his first full season as an NHLer. And Chad Ruhwedel was with him pretty much every step of the way when he was in the actual lineup. Ruhwedel's average ice time dropped from 15:20 down to 14:34, so he lost almost a minute of ice time when he was actually even out there. And his numbers dropped a little bit as well, but not by much, and they were still good underlying numbers. 53% of the shot attempts at 5-on-5. 54% of the expected goals at 5-on-5, 53% of the scoring chances at 5-on-5, and 53% of the high danger chances. So yes, his numbers did drop, but not as drastically as the defense as a whole dropped around him. Jeff Petrie was not as advertised. Jan Rutta got off to a strong start and then was never the same. Brian Dumoulin dropped off a cliff. Chris Letang had a rough start to the season, fixed it by the end of the season, but still not the best year of Chris Letang's career. And P.O. Joseph, like I said, growing pains, as can be expected from a player that has never played a full season at the NHL level. Not to mention, by the end of the season, Dmitry Kulikov was thrown into the mix for no apparent reason. So it was a crapshoot last year on the Penguins' blue line, and Chad Ruhwedel was just another name in an overstaffed, overpaid blue line, except he was not overpaid at all. In fact, he's probably been underpaid for the past 3 seasons. He probably deserves a little bit better of a contract, and yet he keeps coming back, he keeps signing team-friendly deals, and he keeps putting up solid numbers when he gets the opportunity. The most important thing I want to point out to you is this. The Penguins went out and they redid their defense last year. We talked about Rutta. We talked about Jeff Petrie. They gave Marcus Pettersson a little bit of a different opportunity. P.O. Joseph came up and he made a splash and tried to make his first full season work. The team defense got, not marginally, but significantly worse. The year Chad Ruhwedel played, I mentioned that the Penguins were 10th in goals against. Last season, they dropped to 19th. Now, that also is due to the fact that the goaltending was not great this past season. The year prior, it was better. But the goaltending this year wasn't great. So, okay, I'll give you that one. But in the year Ruhwedel started almost every game, the Penguins were 9th in expected goals against. That takes out the goaltending. This past season, they were 18th, dropping 9 spots. And then there's the stat that I've brought up every single time I've talked about the defense this offseason. Expected goals against per 60 minutes. They were 6th in the NHL last season when Chad Ruhwedel was an everyday starter, and they dropped to 21st this past season when Chad Ruhwedel played only half of the games. Now, is he absolved from the poor defensive play by the Pittsburgh Penguins last season? No. But that does not negate the fact that the Pittsburgh Penguins have continued to underutilize Chad Ruhwedel and have unnecessarily put roadblocks up in his way. For a team that really doesn't have young stars that are coming up and taking over, because I get it, Chad Ruhwedel is 33 years old. You would assume that at some point the level of play is going to drop off, but it hasn't as of yet, and there's not really any young prospects that are pushing him out. Yes, a lot of people would like to see Ty Smith get the opportunity. And I'm among that fan base. I'm among that grouping of people that want to see Ty Smith get an opportunity. But there's still roadblocks in the way. Jeff Petrie is there, not living up to his contract. Jan Rutta is there, a completely unnecessary contract for the Pittsburgh Penguins, and one that, in year one at least, did not live up to the hype. Yet, where was Chad Ruhwedel? Playing his 47 games, acting as a seat filler, and doing a damn good job when he got the opportunity. He earned that starting job in 2021, but was demoted for no reason by Ron Hextall and the Pittsburgh Penguins. I, for one, am very happy that Chad Ruhwedel is one of the 6. I believe they actually have 8 defensemen still. And he's one that at least makes it interesting for me to see what Kyle Dubas is going to do with this defense core. Because anybody that looks at the numbers, anybody that watched those games, watched the season where Chad Ruhwedel was an everyday NHLer. He didn't look like he didn't belong. In fact, he looked like he was right at home in that position. Every day, third pairing, right side. It was a roster spot that was answered. And it was a roster spot that was needlessly thrown upside down by Ron Hextall last offseason, and one that is yet to be fixed heading into this offseason. So, we'll see what Chad Ruhwedel ends up doing. I'm assuming that he's going to continue to be a seat filler for the Pittsburgh Penguins, but I do think that he's underappreciated by the organization as a whole. At least the way that he's been utilized, I'd say he's underappreciated. But that's going to do it for this episode of Penguins to Go. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Remember, you can find us on YouTube at Inside the Penguins or anywhere you get your podcast from. We'll see you next time.